Mr. Zlotnick, state and federal water contractors.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, council members. I'm sorry I wasn't here to enjoy the meeting yesterday. I will get my popcorn and watch it off the web.
Does that mean you're allowed to talk today or not allowed to talk today?
Well, you talked enough today to trigger many things.
Well, yeah. But Mr. Becerra was sleeping here overnight, so he could talk today.
And I'm sorry from what he said. I'm sorry I missed it. I really will be looking forward to it. It'll be tension-filled, I'm sure. I do want to also reserve the right to change my mind about some of what I'm about to say, just like you guys have done.
I think it probably goes without saying that with regard to every person who appears before the council, everyone we communicate in writing with, and ourselves, we all reserve roughly the same right.
Right. Okay. But I did want to say, looking at these documents and some of the meetings that we've had, Joe, and appreciate that we may have reached a bit of a tipping point here where after 5 iterations, we seem to be making some progress on a lot of things. So I do want to commend the staff for all the hard work they've obviously done in going through this. That's not to say we're there yet, but that's what makes this fun. For example, I'm very pleased that the council and the staff is recommending that you take up the levy prioritization issue. This is something that we've mentioned before that's in the statute that didn't seem to be there. We know it's contentious. We know, as we heard today, it's going to be a difficult discussion. But as the chairman has said, it's a discussion that's probably long overdue and has been put aside for too long by the state. In terms of specifics, I did want to start with on your shorter matrix, the drafting one, I guess, item 10. And that has to do with the state board issue of parallel development of flow objectives. And I guess my first reaction, and this is something that's been underway throughout the process, where we sort of interpret it that you're sort of working with the state board, but in many respects seem to be deferring to their staff. And in fact, here, the comments, the staff does not agree with these comments. The state board supports this language. Well, we think that there needs to be maybe a little more independent assessment of this. And what we would suggest or request, if you would, because this issue is a big one in terms of BDCP, as Ryan said on these other areas, lots of years of work going in. We're getting towards an end point in terms of the administrative draft has now come out. We're going to get a public draft. The flow issue is central to the whole program. And there's a lot of concern about essentially, as that is moving toward, essentially an agreement and permits and the actual NCCP and HCP, that the state board is kind of over here, sucking a lot of air out of the room and also become another forum, rather than what the design was with them in the room at BDCP, to be there to make sure BDCP wasn't going off too far afield, understanding whatever BDCP came up with had to go to the state board and get approved, not necessarily as is, but, in that. So what we would like to request is a meeting with you, Joe, and appropriate staff, and maybe the chair or other board members who are interested, with some of our folks that they can lay out really the problem. And so I just put that out there on our behalf. We would like to be able to explain why they consider it such a problematic approach, and that you would also support, and you saw the letter that was sent in prior to the state board about asking for the workshops and things going forward. So just want to put that out there because, as I said, for our folks, this becomes very problematic in terms of the two things going on. And potentially,
Mr. Grindstaff, you're willing to meet with these guys?
I'd be glad to meet with them.
Okay, we'll work on that. Appreciate that. And part of it also is in terms of the context overall. I want to say in terms of Randy's comments and on the flow and looking at this with comprehensively, holistically. It sounds like you're moving in that direction in the document, which is appreciated, about how to approach the setting of standards and objectives. It's not just pick a number. It's what are other factors in there, what are the interrelationships of those factors to flow, et cetera. So it sounds like you're moving in that direction in your own document, but frankly, that's what we'd like to see you sort of provide as your sort of recommendation to the state board itself in that. So with that, I move on to the next matrix, which I wasn't here for the discussion yesterday, but quickly want to comment briefly on WRP1. It's page 3 of the bigger matrix. I just think we probably still maintain a bit of a fundamental disagreement on the role of 85021 in relation to the Delta Plan itself, but specifically on the new proposed language. And I know we'll be going forward and looking at language, and obviously have to wait till what pops out finally. But the cannot contribute significantly and the would have an adverse impact on the Delta are just relatively vague terms, it seems, particularly in adverse. I mean, adverse in what way? Because you're violating a standard, you're violating a permit, I don't know. But that just seems sort of vague and just something to think about. And then in terms of, we appreciate the change into a recommendation. It's sort of a similar issue. I guess.
Which one are you talking about?
This is on the WRP1, the second part of it, which became the recommendation.
Yeah, the council has not opined on that issue yet.
Right, okay.
And you should note that those are still in law, and we still have the provision in the plan that says every proponent of a covered action needs to comply with the law. So if the law says you have to have an urban water management plan.
Oh, no, I'm not saying don't have a plan. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that at all. You're talking about the water reliability element addition,
yes.
which is, and it just, in terms of, I think some of the language is good. I'm just trying to be clear where you say consistent with water code. That seems to allow different interpretations of what that means, at least, and so if you're consistent with that. And then also it says net reductions in volume of water use or expansion of local supplies relative. And so that's, as we've argued, as your population grows, you're doing all this. So that seems to account for that. So I want to say appreciate that. See, I said something good, Mr. Chairman. You're getting all like, he's not going to say anything good.
Well, Mr. Natoli's looking at that change right now.
Right, I know. Well, that's always the danger. That's always the danger. If I say something good, it's good. And, oh, my God, we're doing something wrong. We messed up something. What do we, get that shiv back in there, right? On WRR5, I concur with many of the comments that Mr. Becerra made. I think there's some technical language issues here potentially that could get around this. On the issue of the use of the word feasible, as Dan taught, the layperson is going to read that and think what they think, and maybe just simply ending up with an asterisk that then says, like the other footnote says, feasible means what it means in CEQA, which includes cost, which includes all these things, just so it's explicit and people can see that that's what it means, rather than being able to argue if it's possible, it's feasible, so go do it. I mean that's the issue. And also in terms of the discussion you had about the permits and the right, if you have a right to the water, even though you haven't been using it, does that trigger it if you then want to use it? And there's a specific issue, or I would argue, directly related to BDCP. Because it says basically if you have to go through this, if whatever you're doing results in a new or increased long-term average use of water from the Delta. Well, BDCP is hoping to end up with the increased long-term average from today's baseline, of exports. I mean, that's the what we're paying for. There's no guarantee, but that's the intent if you're talking about today's baseline versus trying to get back to something. So that's potentially problematic. That's problematic, it seems. But then I also want to ask in terms of the language, and again, I guess you haven't approved it, obviously, but where it says, all of this is okay if it's consistent with your urban water management plan, et cetera. Well, a lot of these plans, and Ryan sort of alluded to this, but I know in the export areas as well, they contemplate that increase as part of their planning. So does that mean then they're not subject to it? Is that the intent? Again, if so, let's be explicit about what is meant. Or if you're really trying...
Mr. Slotnick, let me. We talked about that new language, and I had yesterday suggested that the phrase "and support the co-equal goals" be added behind the words "equivalent information." But that and other suggestions led the staff to say they wanted to look at the language again, come back at the next meeting with a redrafted version to see what it looks like.
Good. No, I mean, I think we're going in the right direction, certainly. So, Just
Thank
want
you,
to make
sir.
Mr. Natoli more nervous.
Okay, thank you. Members, look, we're going to run out of our television tape in about 6 minutes, and I think we probably ought to take a 5-minute break right now. I have one more speaking request, but there could be others. Mr. Chappelle, I do not want to interrupt you in the middle of the discussion to change the tape. So if you don't mind, let's change the tape now and see what's out there. So if you could give us 5 minutes, gentlemen, put up the "we're in recess for 5 minutes" sign or something like that.